Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. New background, dark, mysterious, plain. We're going to go with it. Good to see you all here. You know, it was only a little more than 500 years ago, not that long ago, back in the year 1517, that Martin Luther took on the power of the Vatican. And he believed that the church had been taken over by Satan. If you can believe it, that's actually what he did believe. But one of his main beefs was the dominance of the priest in the whole spiritual hierarchy between man and God. So that is, that for centuries, the church had imposed its priests as the intermediaries between ordinary people and God. So in the Bible, Jesus said, you can only get to the Father through me. The church changed that around a little bit. They basically said, you can only get to God through us, through our priests who work for us. Got to get through the system. So in Luther's reasoning, every person had the ability to reach God themselves. You pray and you reach God. That's it. You didn't need any intermediaries. Now, this idea worked its way very, very definitively into an intellectual movement of a few centuries later, what historians will still call the Enlightenment. So these days, Enlightenment thinkers are a little bit suspect, being, dead white men and all. But you had people like Locke and Voltaire and Thomas Jefferson and many others essentially took this idea from Luther and they made it even more universal. So for them, each person was solely responsible for their own intellectual development. So for them, the world had a certain rational order to it, and it was within each person's ability to utilize their power of reason to learn what that was. Whatever it was you wanted to learn, you had reason. Now, everyone had it. Everyone had this power, they believed. Some had it a little bit more than others, but everyone had it. And now, obviously, they knew, and we know, that every one of us will benefit from learning important ideas and thoughts from other people. But you, yourself, are the judge because you have reason and no other authority need apply. Now, this idea naturally led to the concept of freedom of conscience and really became a foundation for Western society for, since the last several centuries. Now, obviously, the reality is always a little more complicated. Authorities love to impose their will and their influence over people, but the idea was born, and it was very tough to eradicate. And it's been a very important part of our culture ever since. But now we are reverting back to the old days. The priests are returning in the form of big tech. When we have Google and Facebook explicitly censoring, deplatforming, and erasing opinions that they consider harmful by ever-shifting standards, they're telling you that you don't have the ability to make your own decisions. So that's one thing. But even more than that, because of their power over our society, they're giving you another message, and it's not too subtle either. Not only are you losing the ability to make your own decisions, but you're losing the authority to make your own decisions. That your decisions are their decisions, or their decisions become your decisions. And your ability to access information and mainly to spread information, that must conform to their political agenda. And in case you're wondering, that's a pretty easy agenda to identify on a whole lot of things. Most recently, you get the news that Facebook owner Mark Zuckerberg is now known to have given nearly $500 million in the last presidential election campaign to one of the parties, to battleground swing states, and you can figure out what that is. Wow. So the thing is, if you have the correct opinions, you're fine. If you don't, then you're ever more likely to become erased. Now, look, everyone sees this. Everyone knows this. I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard before. There are no shortage of people commenting on this, in the ever shrinking spaces that they can find. But what I'm not seeing is much commentary on the fact that this is a reversal of a 500-year hard-fought journey by Western society. And I say Western because this is a Western society concept toward freedom of expression. You know, physicians, doctors will often refer to a trauma to the body as an insult. And in every way that I can think of, these measures are insults to our bodies, our political bodies, our social bodies, psychological. And it's even worse than this. It's even worse. So we all know about sock puppets and bots. Like nearly a decade ago, Edward Snowden showed us that the United States and British intelligence used sock puppets as part of their army of PSYOP warriors against the people, you know, all in the cause of corralling public opinion in the directions that they want. And by the way, we know that large corporations do the same thing. In fact, they often will have even better capability. They may have more money at their disposal, and they have their own intelligence agencies essentially, and they've got their own sock puppet army, all for their public image and astroturfing, that's what it's called, and managing public opinion. This is very much in their interest as well. So in other words, the opinions that you encounter in your social media journeys, or in your internet journeys really, are at least sometimes very likely to be fake accounts, or more accurately, fake people explicitly there in order to manipulate you toward their ends. Because like you'll have a situation where someone will go to work and they'll take on 10 or 20 or whatever persona, and they'll just hang out on the message boards on Reddit or social media feeds, YouTube, or wherever, Facebook, and that's what they do. Their job literally is to manage your opinion. They're not who they say they are. We've all seen it, right? We've all seen this. And then there's bots as distinct from the sock puppets. So bots are algorithms, they're programs, and they have a certain level. Sometimes they can have a certain level of AI, and they can also imitate people as long as they've got the right opinions. Now, I don't have information about how widespread this is, but it certainly is a thing. And I don't know if it's not super widespread now, it's got tremendous potential. So here's a not so random thought. Does anyone examine the likelihood that artificial intelligence has got to be playing a role already in manipulating public opinion? Again, I don't know how widespread this is, but it's not difficult to see this as a realistic Black Mirror episode at some point. Swarms of artificially intelligent bots everywhere on social media or on Reddit feeds, or every platform, every place where digital conversations take place. You go online now, you read the news, and you're going to see masses of comments. And a lot of times it's very suspicious, like they all will go in a certain direction, or better yet, expertly positioned to give the veneer of freedom of opinion, but still drowning out the bad thing. And, you can only see this getting worse in the future. How difficult would this be, really? The smarter the algorithms get, the harder it's going to be to filter them out. In fact, when you think about the general level of comment discourse, not here, of course, although actually sometimes here, because we get them too, but it's really a no-brainer that algorithms can just jump in and sound like a person, at least for a little while. Bot comments are kind of everywhere already. Like you could, or maybe if not bot comments, we'll say spam comments that are pre-written, but which will go out automatically to countless message boards. They flood the financial and crypto spaces. I like to check those out, all in the service of making a buck. On one of incarnation of one of my earlier websites, when I had comments as a feature, I found that section immediately flooded with bots and spam comments. So they're obviously everywhere. It's often easy to see them. And you can see them in the future being used for political conformity, if not already. And we already know, I've talked about this in one of my previous shows here on YouTube, that Google, which owns YouTube, has already contracted with Rand Corporation to identify conspiracy theories at scale. In other words, using smart algorithms. This is happening now. I mean, in fact, Google's thing with Rand took place, that study was a year ago. Rand came out with their paper for Google earlier in 2021. So I think we can assume Google's taken the wonderful little ideas of Rand about how to find conspiracy theories, and there's no doubt that Google will tweak those, massively improve them, and they may very well be implementing them right now for all we know. The only question is how widespread all this is. And, everything's opaque to us. We don't know. And now you've also got all the warnings. YouTube's had them for years now. A lot of my videos will have different warnings on them and disclaimers that will say this could be dangerous for you. They'll direct you to the proper Wikipedia page. It's got all the proper authoritative information relating with UFOs, which of course I write about all the time, or abductions, conspiracies. Like, you will frequently get a YouTube statement that says, here, check out this Wikipedia page for the reliable information. And by the way, now Instagram has been putting warnings on certain people's pages that they don't like. Facebook owns Instagram. So they'll now put a warning up in front of a page, if you're a bad person to them, that says, are you sure you want to follow this person? And then they'll say this account's repeatedly posted false information that was reviewed by independent fact checkers or went against our community guidelines. I learned about this just recently on Tim Pool's YouTube channel in relation to one of his co-hosts, Luke. I'm sure some of you watched Tim Pool. I've checked out his shows many times. Now that's interesting to me because I've listened to Luke on that program many times, and I find him very smart, very insightful, and worth my time in listening to him. You may not feel that way, but you might. But even if you don't, I do, and so do many other people, and we respect our ability to make a decision. Now, I wasn't aware that level of intrusiveness had gone to such a degree, at least on Instagram, but who's surprised? It's been very obvious that this is the direction we've been going into for several years. The priests are back. What's really interesting is that if you think about the medieval times in which ordinary people, in so many ways, they were just dominated by the local priests, right? At least for the most part, they all pretty much agreed on things. The basic religious beliefs were consistent. I mean, there were heresies and all of that, but there was a very strong social consensus on values overall. That is not the case now. So here you have a new priesthood that is inserting itself between you and your ability to get information or to speak information, and they hold opinions and values that do not align with, half the entire population, roughly. Like, that's a lot of conflict. Our internet searches and our online life are being manipulated, always skewed toward authoritative sources as they see it. In other words, establishment-approved sources. These searches that we do are ranked by, who are they ranked by? Nameless individuals, or even more nameless algorithms, based on criteria that no one seems to be aware of, except that those criteria follow an agenda to promote the current global revolution. And the fact is that huge numbers of people just don't like this. We don't like it. We don't approve. And many of us are being silenced, or at least we could say the power elite is trying to silence us, like trying to throw a lead blanket over us. And don't forget something here. So I'm talking about big tech, but never forget the relationship between big tech and national security. So I mentioned Google and Rand Corporation a few moments ago. So Rand is one of the biggest defense think tanks in the United States. For like 70 years, I think they've done tremendous amount of work for generations, for the CIA, for the Pentagon, for the entire national security community. And now they've contracted with Google to hunt down and eliminate so-called conspiracy theories. But that's just one example. Actually, when you think about it, Google's very foundation in the 1990s was done with extensive support and guidance from the CIA, explicitly for the purpose of mass surveillance. This is absolutely the fact. And it's very interesting how back then Google was not the biggest search engine around. Right? Remember Yahoo, Alta Vista, for anyone who can think back to the 90s. InfoSeek was another one. There was even more than that. Google was a little player. They come along and they very quickly destroyed that competition. I mean, I wonder why. I mean, look, okay, let's give them credit. They did a great job. Their search engine was fast. It was easy. It was super convenient. They also had with no one knew, they had a very interesting and powerful base of support behind them. They had the CIA. No one knew about that at the time. So, Google's been doing evil ever since the beginning. You can see them as the next generation version of Operation Mockingbird. And when you see how incredibly powerfully Google dominates the whole online landscape these days. I mean, hell, they own YouTube. I mean, good grief. And then there's Facebook, which we all know about their relationship to political action groups like the neoconservative group, the Atlantic Council, which helps to keep them on a Cold War anti-Russian level of insanity. We've all known about that. Why does Facebook need the Atlantic Council? Like, does anyone ever ask that? Or Facebook's obvious support for the globalization-oriented international political and financial class. Or Facebook's opposition to any form of political populism, left or right. Facebook's banning of so-called conspiracy theories all over the place and hate speech, can't forget that, however they define that. How Facebook panders to the political establishment to create ever more control over what people are allowed to say and to hear. Amazon's another one, of course. Amazon has also been engaged in limiting certain books and products that are of the wrong political persuasion. Although I have to say, I don't think to the same degree that you get on YouTube or Facebook or even Instagram, but Amazon's part of that new elite for sure. You've got them doing cloud computing services for a huge portion of the American intelligence establishment, for example. So it's big tech, but it's not only big tech, okay? And for those people who continue to say, well, they're private companies, they can do what they want. I mean, we've heard this a lot. Actually, I think we used to hear this more a few years ago. I think even the people who were saying that back then are starting to realize, holy crap, like this is getting really serious now. I don't hear it quite as much, but you still do hear it. And the thing is that to remember is that these private entities are critically important in implementing the new censorship and the new authoritarianism and fascism, really. Why? Because they're working as proxies for the government. They're working as proxies for the deep state, or as I've written many times, the national security state, and for international power brokers who want to have censorship, but they can't do it, obviously, via government channels because, they're still trying to keep the veneer of legality to all of this. So they work with big corporations and hide behind them. It's really not that complicated. I remember the olden times when each of us was responsible for learning on our own without a finger-wagging school marm nanny telling us what we were supposed to think or what was off limits to our inquiry. And certainly not what opinions we were allowed to have or not allowed to have. We had to figure all those things out on our own. We made mistakes. And we often made mistakes because we didn't have enough information. Sometimes we got fooled by wrong data or by misleading opinions. Yep, we certainly did, all of us. In other words, we were free to make our mistakes because that was our right. There was no need to keep us safe from misinformation. I mean, the thought was actually ridiculous. I remember this so very well. It was laughable. It was beyond laughable to think, oh, yes, we have to keep you safe from bad ideas. Like who? No one believed that. No one talked like that. No one. Young people today, I mean, many of them, unfortunately, may not realize just how much has been lost, how much freedom of conscience, freedom of opinion has been lost. I mean, I know many do realize, but I think many don't. And once these ideas are gone, like once the generations that really support these are gone, it may be very difficult to resuscitate them. Not impossible. Great ideas will never die fully, but they can be tough. And that's especially so when These big tech companies are backed by the power of the state, which itself, as I said, is in the midst of creating a genuine revolution in our society. This is a real revolution. And it started before COVID. But COVID has clearly given it a major impetus, a major push forward, major justification. A new culture, you can obviously see it's being created, or at least that's the attempt. So complete with our own mass psychosis, public shaming, struggle sessions, social exiles, public confessions, the whole thing. It's all back, and I personally believe it is back with definite support from the powers behind the scenes. All this works perfectly well to keep us divided and hating each other while they steal all the loot. We're in a situation now. I mean, there was another news article. The top 1% of wealth owners, I think in America, own more than the entire middle class, more wealth. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Meanwhile, we're all being taught to hate each other. The thing is, we're seeing a system of control coming in that is vastly more sophisticated and powerful than anything that, I can personally think of from the past. In the old days, powerful social control would come from the dogmatic monotheistic religions, and that worked very well. Now, in the West, we've kind of more or less destroyed huge portions of that system. So what are we seeing now? We're seeing the creation of a new and very powerful system of control. And as before, it's all about the control over the information that reaches you. Control the information you get and control the information you speak. And by the way, turns out this became a much easier system of control to implement than most of us ever realized. I remember back in the 1990s. I remember the 90s. Every new development of computing, every new development of internet technology, only seemed to go in one direction, toward greater freedom. That's how it felt back in the 90s. This feeling of freedom that we all got from having access to so much more information. It's very hard to overstate that, right? It was intoxicating. And I think all of us who were engaged in the internet at that time, we all felt it. It was very powerful. It was convenient. And all you had to do is pay for an internet connection. After that, it was all free. And we were seduced by all of that, the power, the freedom, the convenience. Yeah. In the process, we gave up more autonomy than we ever realized. If you're a mouse in a laboratory and you see free cheese, it's very difficult to see that might be in a trap. Free cheese, that's a trap. There's a reason that you're getting free cheese, little mouse. A mouse should not take the free cheese, and we shouldn't either. We should have been more savvy and less seduced. Right, that's true. And especially so by the time that the so-called free services like Facebook came around. Social media took convenience, power, and control to totally new levels. And these are levels in which they're now being used explicitly to enforce a global revolution. Okay, so that's several times I've used the phrase global revolution. So do I really mean that? Is there really a global revolution going on? Yes, a global revolution is really going on. There most definitely. I recently called it totalitarian, I think in my last video, or fascist. Fascist works extremely well too, quite frankly. Fascist literally, as we've known, is a strong coordination between state and corporate power as a means to control people. Well, look around you. Look around you. All right. The thing is, we don't really have perfect language to describe all this. In a way, this is new. You could say fascism is fascism, but this is not fascism of the 1930s, which is what everyone thinks about. Guess what? Because this isn't the 1930s. So fascism today is not going to look like fascism of the 30s. It's not going to look like parades or, fists slamming onto the podium, right? This fascism isn't even national. People get confused by this. It's international. It's international. It's bureaucratic. It's digital, right? It's all of those things. It's based on a level of information control that has never existed before. And it is based on the necessity of controlling a population and this is new, controlling a population that has fewer and fewer living jobs available, like jobs that you can get a living wage from. All right. This wasn't the case in the past. I mean, there were economic downturns, but this was never considered a permanent thing at the time. We're looking at a situation now. You have mainstream economists talking about the Robopocalypse. I mentioned this many times. Robots coming to take your job. Algorithms coming to take your job. An excess of people, as some of the elite like to call us, the useless eaters. And that is a phrase that has been used. So all these people at the top, they see us as just not all that necessary anymore. They've got machines. They've got algorithms to do lots of the work anyway that ordinary people used to do. They don't need us, at least not all of us, not as much as they did. So what do? They pacify us with, stimmy checks or UBI in the future, making us basically dependent wards of the state. That's one thing they do. Another thing they'll do is drug us with more and more pharmaceuticals. And that is going to continue to be an important part of our future, not just because of the amazing profits, yes, all right, but also because it's just useful to control people. You've got to assume all those antidepressant medications, they don't make it easy to analyze the system that's screwing you over harder and harder every year. No, those pharmaceutical drugs can't make it easy. Or the, awful obesity-inducing foods, ditto, same thing. And of course, the never-ending stream of propaganda entertainment that is so obviously trying to socially engineer a new form of society in which somehow it's become cool and liberal and progressive to trust major criminal corporations like Big Pharma. I mean, we trust Pfizer? Pfizer? They were subject to the largest fine in American history just about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. These are criminals. Have we forgotten? I guess so. I guess we have forgotten. It's amazing. You talk to people in Big Pharma in that industry, when you get them off the record, you get them with a few drinks in them. I've done this, and hear them go off on the deeply criminal nature of that entire industry. Yeah, when they're not on their talking points, you let them go. But now we serve them. Now it's cool and hip to trust them. From the point of view of the people at the top of our little food chain, this revolution has to happen. All right? It has to happen. And they have to get at least a substantial portion of the people on board. You got to get buy-in from the public. Now, how do you do that? Well, you've got to manage public opinion. You have to control public opinion. So that means censorship and propaganda, right? Censorship and propaganda. And when necessary, use real force like the police squads over in Australia when they beat people up for drinking, or checking your coffee cup to make sure that you actually have a reason for not wearing your mask. They did this. Or, dragging pregnant women out of their homes because they were on Facebook saying the wrong thing or whatever. They'll use force when they have to, but they'll prefer the censorship. They'll prefer the mind control. But the revolution, back to that, why does it have to happen? It has to happen, in their opinion, because they all see, well, all the things that I was just talking about, the coming difficulty of getting genuine employment. Like, you got to find a way to keep these people under control. Because what they don't want is a mass of restless people in the society. And there's another reason, even a more long-term reason, which I've written about this in my very last book, which I wrote about a year ago, called The Alien Agendas. This revolution has to happen because they see that our species is moving into a new stage of humanity. I call it the fourth stage of humanity. From hunting and gathering for hundreds of thousands of years to settled agriculture for just the last few thousand years, and then to stage 3, science and industry. And now that was the last couple of hundred years, and now the final stage, which is stage 4. What is stage 4? Stage 4 involves not just transhumanism, not just genetic control or designer babies, although that's part of it. Yes, that's part of it. But it also involves 5G and 6G smart devices that will monitor us throughout every portion of our lives. All of the totalitarian meddling that so many parents now do to their kids, the helicoptering to destroy the future sense of independence from their kids and the creativity and the ability for kids to think for themselves and solve their own problems, all that meddling, that totalitarianism, all of it is now being done to the rest of us by centralized big tech and government, to the whole rest of the population. Constant surveillance, constant monitoring of behavior and opinions. And that's all here. It's just getting worse, of course. So what you see in China will be fully spread to the rest of the world. Each country, each region will have their own version of it, but it's happening. You can see it already. This fourth stage of humanity also will involve a highly advanced AI. Now, just what that AI is going to look like is being debated by the experts. Will it be truly conscious, or will it just seem conscious? Or will it not even be all that much of a problem? Who knows? Will it work in humanity's favor or not? They debate it. But what's obvious is the fact that it's going to continue to be used just as it is now by powerful corporations and governments to further their interests against the people. AI is incredibly powerful as a tool for control in the information war, which is part of what's going on. Because if you need to have a global revolution, you've got to dominate information flow. And once advanced AI is consolidated by some powerful player, you can expect an even more impressive lockdown of the mind in the future. On top of that, we're looking at a future in which our interconnectivity to the web or the cloud is only going to increase, of course, whether through direct implants like Neuralink, Elon Musk's Neuralink or something like that, or some other means. Doesn't really even matter in a sense. Somehow the system's going to make it virtually impossible for ordinary people to extricate themselves from the system, from the matrix. Like, it's happening. And it makes me realize that calling the internet the web was eerily prescient. It was originally named the web because of the interconnectivity, but now maybe it's more like a trap, woven by the spiders to ensnare us, the web. One more thing about information control is worth considering here. This affects every one of us. So you look at the extreme polarization of our world right now, okay? I mean, you got people at each other's throats. In my lifetime, it's never been this bad. And I think at least in America, you would have to go back to the actual American Civil War to find this level of social polarization. I mean, maybe it was worse in the 60s. I was too young. I was a little kid. I didn't see it directly, but I don't think so. I think it's worse now. And now, so the thing is, it's both sides of this divide are convinced that they are in possession of morality and that the other side is immoral. You hear this a lot. You hear it on both sides. It's easy to forget that the other side, whatever side you are not, they truly believe they are on the good side. They believe they have morality and you do not, that you are participating in something that's evil or that you are evil. Keep that in mind because that's what we've come to. Now, this is really crystallized over the issue of vaccine mandates. And yes, here I am mentioning vaccine mandates, God forbid. We wondered if lockdowns would do it. Lockdowns are a definite sticking point, no question. And the masks. Masks turns out, I think, to a slightly lesser degree. At this point, I look at masks, I think they're really just for showing or not showing what political party you belong to. That's about it. That's been only good use for. But the forced vaccination of millions of people who don't want to be vaccinated, all right, that promises to be the issue that brings everything to the boiling point. I can't think of anything that's actually more intrusive in the minds of many people. And the thing is, this is whatever you think on the issue, you got to recognize there are millions of people who don't want that. They don't want it. And they're being forced to take it at the cost of their jobs and whatever. And the side that wants them to take it is like, you're being immoral by not taking it. But they don't see it that way. And the thing is, each side of that argument has its own data that it works off of. That's the fact. Each side immerses itself in information that accords with what it already believes. We know this. And I've looked at the right, I've looked at the left, and I've seen misinformation and disinformation on both sides. Because, basically, because YouTube's kicked off and Google and Facebook have kicked off any right of center position on this. So that has driven so many people to alternative media. And I will read that. And there's good information there. And sometimes I've had to fact check certain data. And it's like, no, that's BS. No one is immune. Like, no one has got perfect information. And certainly I see it on the other side as well. All right. So we all know that we all live in these little bubbles. And all you have to do is take some time to listen to what people on the other side are saying to each other. It's not a bad idea. It doesn't mean that you will be persuaded by them, but the fact is they've got their own access to their own information. And I'm bringing this up here in the context of what's happening is that, first of all, we can all be very easily manipulated in this way by restricted access to information, okay? Because basically, we're only as good as the information we get. That's how it is. If you only see one side of something, that's all you're going to believe. That's all you will know. And what we are seeing is one side of that argument very definitively becoming marginalized, becoming erased, and even at times being made illegal. That's happening. One side of the argument is very much in line with the major corporations and the state and the people who meet at Davos and inside the gates of hell and all of that. And the other side is very rapidly being made invisible. Now, look, if that's not a fascist revolution, I don't know what is. Now, a word about all of this and the main thing that I've studied for years, which is UFOs. You thought I was not going to talk about UFOs. Well, anyone who's followed me for a little while knows that I've always studied UFOs, and I've also studied politics. Now, when I began studying UFOs almost 30 years ago, in fact, it was mainly in the areas of studying the UFO cover-ups, which that's inherently political. And actually, it's inherently conspiratorial. So let's just put that out there. I've been dealing with conspiracies for that long. So you can imagine how I sometimes are going to feel when I get the message nearly every day in our world that we're not supposed to believe in conspiracy theories. I'm like, hey, that's exactly what I've been studying and writing about and talking about for a very long time. And they're not just theories, by the way. So there are several really important things to remember in connecting this current global revolution and the censorship and the propaganda and the fact that all of this is now becoming a very obvious transformation of our society, all of that, and connecting with the UFO subject. So after all, you might be thinking, with all the insanity happening in our world, why even bother anymore with UFOs? Like, honestly, it's not hard to think this can be pushed aside for right now because we're dealing with some serious stuff right here. And I can understand that sentiment, at least to some extent, but that is only because it's very easy for people to forget just how big the UFO phenomenon is. We all know there's a great deal about this that's very important. And none of this importance is being discussed in our larger society or mainstream society. I mean, even despite, like, despite the last 4 years and how the subject has become a bit more public, and it's at least not the kiss of death to talk about in public the way it used to be, really what you find is that UFOs are still absent, really absent from our public discourse in any meaningful way, despite all that's happened in the last 4 years. Despite all of that, we're still having really next to zero meaningful conversations about UFOs in the public realm. The fact that you have astonishing sightings that continue to happen every single week, somewhere in the world, and often several incredible sightings every week somewhere in the world. All you have to do is look online for them. They're still available. For instance, at the National UFO Reporting Center, big fan of what Peter Davenport there does, or Filer's Files. Love George Filer. He's still going. Big fan. So, there are sources out there. And we're talking about something here, this phenomenon, that it's everywhere. It's often in the dead of night, but sometimes it's in broad daylight, but stealthy. They're always stealthy. We're talking about something that is backed by tremendous technology, all right? Whatever this is, tremendous technology. Virtually infinite resources as far as in any practical sense, like money, whatever that is or their equivalent, they got a lot of it. And commitment. This is commitment. This has been going for decades and decades and decades. Whoever is doing this, they are intent on following through whatever this is. All right. Engaging in activity around our world. It's easy to forget because you get no discussion about this in our public discourse, practically none. It's consigned to the fringes, the alternative, like that's it. All right. So that's important. And there are just so many implications implicit in that basic reality, the reality of massive numbers of powerful sightings every week around the world. What are the implications? Well, technology, for one. Whatever this technology is, all right, it is clearly world-changing in probably multiple ways. Multiple ways. We all talk about propulsion and transportation. Well, yeah, that's one important way. Material science of these craft, whatever they are, is probably amazing, transformative. Do they manipulate space and time in some way? Like all of that and so much more. So that's the technology and the science. Then there's another implication of all of this, the secrecy. Like the fact that for more than 75 years now, basically, we have been spoon-fed lies and BS about this since the beginning. Secrecy, like that matters. It matters to any society, a modern society that's got technology that runs it like we do. Like that level of secrecy is important for us to talk about. And then there's another implication, like who are these guys? Who's operating these craft, these objects? Like, what are they doing? Are they friend or foe? Why do they hang around over people's homes in the dead of night at 3 a.m? Why do they do that? Like, these are significant, relevant questions. And those are just for starters. That's the implications of the UFO phenomenon, which is completely pushed out of our public discourse. And then there's the fact that this phenomenon is continuing right on through our pandemic and right on through our lockdowns, right on through our mandates. It's not slowing down in the least. And then there's the fact of how this current revolution will affect the entire scenario of what we call UFO disclosure. So to me, this is important. Like in earlier times, researchers, I'm talking like the 1950s and 60s, it was a different universe back then. Back then, researchers discussed UFOs in the context of what they believed to be a free society, and which in many crucial ways what was arguably more free. I mean, it's crazy to say that, but in many ways it was more free. Today, we're looking at the UFO phenomenon in the context of a global fascistic revolution. So you ask yourself, how will that revolution affect disclosure? Well, one thing I think we have to consider is that the new acceptable narrative on UFOs is going to be something that continues to support the basic cover-up of information. We have moved from an official position for years and years and years that it was all BS, it was all hallucinations, all hoaxes, and all of that. Okay, we had all of that insulting nonsense handed to us. So now we're in a position in which it's a little different, all right? In which it's now entirely likely that the new narrative is going to be, yes, it's actually real, okay, but they're all experimental technology, classified technology. There are no abductions and probably no aliens. Like, that's the new narrative that you're going to be, and you can see this narrative coming into place. Just look at the recent 4-part series on UFOs that J.J. Abrams did for Showtime. Part 1 is available on YouTube. Parts 2, 3, and 4, you got to buy access to. But the first 2 parts tell you, oh, yes, this is actually real. And you were not crazy for seeing a UFO. This is actually a real phenomenon. There is a cover-up. What are they covering up? That's the rest of the episode, the rest of the series. Yeah, they're covering up secret tech, not aliens. No, not aliens, and no abductions. No, that's a mistaken belief. So that's the message. And you got a really high-level Hollywood producer making this, very qualified, very good producer, very slick, and it was very well done, but it was pure propaganda, right? So I think that's the new narrative that's going to be rolled out. And I think there's a very good likelihood that this will be the new acceptable UFO narrative, right? Not the aliens are here, run for the hills. A lot of people say, oh, it's going to be a false flag. They're here to scare the hell out of you. I don't believe that. I think what they're trying to do is this. No aliens. It's all okay. No aliens. And, that's going to be the acceptable. And then any conspiracy theories that try to go further are very likely in the future to be erased. That's what I think. So a few years ago, it might have seemed, a lot of hyperbole to make this prediction that UFO conspiracy theories are going to be banned from the internet. But I don't think anyone who's been paying attention is automatically going to dismiss this possibility now. No way. In fact, it seems entirely plausible. It might even be probable. I say the things that I'm saying here because I still believe it's not too late for people to see clearly what's going on all around us, that this is a revolution. And it's not a revolution from the people, all right? Never forget, there's always, you got revolution from the people, but there's another kind of revolution, a state-sponsored revolution, a revolution from above. And that involves, and those happen, those types of things happen. It involves a massive roundup of society in the form of information control and propaganda. It's all about mind control, all right? Fascist or totalitarian regimes or communist regimes, they can't just bulldoze over the people 100%. They still need massive public support. They all have strived for that. And that's why now you see the powers that be throwing everything into this effort right now. Very, very heavy-handed. It's like in an era of masks, like their masks have come off. So what's encouraging, though, is that there are more and more signs of resistance to this around the world. I'm happy to see a lot of this in Europe. Surprised, frankly, no offense, Europe, but I'm surprised but happy to see what's going on there. Here in America, also, we're seeing it grow. We need to come to a society-wide reckoning of the damage that's taking place because of a government corporate apparatus that is working together to strip you of your autonomy, of your right to your own opinions, and the authority to determine your own conclusions about the nature of reality itself. Like, that's you. You don't need an interpreter. You don't need a nanny. You don't need a sanctimonious, preachy, moralizing, hypocritical criminal telling you what to believe or how to live your life. That's your job. You decide how to live. You decide what to think and what to believe. Just be free. Well, that's all I got. So thanks for listening. Appreciate the support as always. I see you all in the chat room there. Good to see you. Thank you for the super chats. If you like what I do here, you know the drill. Subscribe to the channel, please. It helps me out. Helps the algorithms. Helps me against the algorithms. Click all the buttons, get the notifications, and also check out my members site at richardolanmembers.com. I'm always doing a lot over there. And that's it. Catch you next time. Let's keep fighting the good fight. Later, y'all.